This week, we're speaking with a PhD and founder of a healthcare planning firm to help people make better wealth decisions when they're older. A lot of people make decisions when they're at middle age and whatnot, but the decisions that you make when you're older have a lot of important consequences at a point in time where your capacity might be reduced. So, we're going to talk about that today so you can learn how to simplify your life and get some hacks going to help you make better wealth decisions as you age.
This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast dedicated to helping pre-retirees and retirees manage risk and economic uncertainty by adopting a pension-style approach to improve your risk-return trade-off. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto.
This week, we're speaking with Chris High. Chris is the founder and CEO of Wealth Chat, which includes both wealth care planning and wealth care solutions. He has a PhD from MIT, and he is a very respected person in the financial planning community based in California. Chris, how are you today?
I'm great, John. How are you? And thanks for having me.
Well, I'm great as well, and I'm really delighted to be able to have you on. This is a real treat for me. Let's begin by getting you introduced, doing a quick level set to the people that are listening. Tell us a little bit about wealth care.
Yeah, so over the about past 10 years or so, what I've been trying to do is help mostly older adults and their family plan for longevity and plan for both the good things, but in many ways, more importantly, some of the downsides of longevity. As you know, most of us are living longer than our parents or grandparents, and that's kind of the good news and the bad news. We all enjoy living longer. But living longer right now is very expensive. And planning can be very complicated because you have all kinds of things. As we get older, we start to lose our physical and our cognitive health. And that can be very expensive in different ways, which I'm sure we'll get into. So I decided, about 10 years ago, really, that not enough was being done to help families prepare for these events, because again, they're relatively new. Our parents or grandparents, especially our grandparents, we didn't live as long, and even if we did live long and wanted to get expensive medical treatments, they just weren't available. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, if you had a heart attack, they gave you aspirin, right? If you have high cholesterol, maybe you get a statin. If you have cancer, maybe radiation, but you're kind of out of luck, right? So even if you had the money to pay for these treatments, they just weren't available. But now they are. So basically, in short, life has gotten longer, but it's also gotten more complicated and it's gotten more expensive.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I say frequently, and I've done a number of videos on this topic, and I've talked about it with other guests on the podcast as well, is that longevity risk is quite possibly the least understood and least appreciated risk associated with financial planning in the Western world today, because of all the reasons that you've just given. A lot of people will make assumptions with regard to how to go about decumulation and how long they've got to live and what kind of a rate of return is accepted and expected and so forth. But a lot of people foolishly plan to live to the age that their parents lived to, or whatever. And they end up living a decade or more longer than what they thought. And everything else in their plan made complete sense. The only thing that didn't make sense is they didn't die on time. So it's a real problem. I strongly agree with you. Let's begin the main body of the conversation by talking about decumulation. One of the things that I know that you help people with is a lot of people in the wealth management industry focus on how to get the money. But once you've got it and you stop earning money and you can no longer buy the dip, and now you actually have to start taking money out to live on, what are the sorts of things that you talk to people about as they plan for decumulation later in life?
Yeah, I mean, decumulation and accumulation to me are sort of fundamentally very different processes, which you've alluded to. I mean, accumulation is mostly about, it's mostly kind of an optimization problem. Just save as much money as possible. Not saying it's easy. I'm not saying there's some, issues doing that, but it's pretty straightforward. And the goals are, for most people, the goal is pretty standard. The goal is like, just give me as much money as I can get, for when I retire. Once you go to decumulation, it really switches from an optimization problem to what I think is like a decision-making problem under uncertainty. And so that's a very fundamentally different planning environment. It's a lot more complicated, and entails a lot more risk. So, what I like to say is as we get older, you talk about longevity risk, and that's one of the risks that, financial professionals have worked on, trying to model. And that and sort of market risk also are somewhat subject to being modeled. But then you get into this whole realm of these healthcare risks and also what I like to call decision-making risks. Because longevity doesn't mean just living longer. Longevity means living longer under periods of, again, high uncertainty and high risk and high cost. And the longer you live also, the more chances you have to make bad decisions. So I think that's something that's really sort of underappreciated, is that, again, our parents and grandparents, even if they lived long, they didn't have as many decisions to make, right? They had Social Security, they had pensions, hopefully they had some savings. But again, it's just like, okay, the pension check comes in, the Social Security check comes in. And for many families, that was most, if not all, that's all they had. And for many families, that was enough. And save little savings too. You got to take out some money now and then. But now, very few people have pensions. Social Security is great, but it accounts for, fairly, for many 30, 50%, maybe of your desired income. So, okay, so how do I now figure out, how to pay for everything, on an ongoing basis? And that can be 10, 20, 30 years where people are having to make decisions about where to get that income from. And so what can happen is, so that means there's a lot of decisions, right? So, it can be, hopefully it's not, every month, but you're trying to figure out, how am I going to pay for stuff and what to sell, maybe what to buy, but what to sell, what to transfer, which account to take something out of. And all those decisions can kind of add up. And then on the other side, you have all, these healthcare issues, which again, you may not have had, your predecessors may not have had, because they didn't live that long. And they did live long. The treatments weren't available. Now they can. Now you can say, look, hey, John, you've got, I was just reading an article about lupus. Maybe we can cure lupus now. Maybe. But you know what? It's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, and there's similar other oncology treatments, and hopefully 10 years from now, they won't cost that much, but now they do. Right. So now John's got to make a decision.
So let's see if we can maybe go a little bit further into the weeds on exactly that. You've written about decision risk and the risks that elderly people need to make that their parents and grandparents didn't need to make. And the podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. And so this is really all about another decision that needs to be made, could be made under adverse situations because of the limitations. And we haven't discussed it expressly, so I'll put it out there. Cognitive decline is a real issue in the world these days. And a lot of people who have to make these decisions are making them concurrent with their mental health deteriorating as well as their physical health. What advice would you give with regard to people who have to make decisions in that context?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the sad irony of this is that people have to make some of the most important decisions of their lives just at a period of time when their capacity to make those decisions is declining. So, I mean, there's studies that suggest that the financial decision-making capacity peaks actually in their early 50s, not 60s or 70s, but early 50s. And, look at the statistics I've looked at suggest that about 30% of older adults over 65 suffer from either mild cognitive impairment or some form of dementia. 30%, it's a big number, right? And then those illnesses tend to get worse over time. So when you get up to age 75, it's more like 50%. So it's a problem. And again, our ancestors didn't have to deal with this often because they just didn't live that long. They didn't have to worry about cognitive decline because they died when they were 65 or 70. But now we're living longer. So there's several suggestions that I have. One is this gets back to a discussion we had a little bit earlier. One is to make things less complicated. right? Simplify your finances. So that's something I always say, simplify the number of accounts you have. And if you can simplify the number of transactions you have to make. So put as much as possible on what I like to call safe autopilot. Put bill pays on autopilot, put deposits or withdrawals on autopilot. And so you don't have to constantly go back in and make a decision, because at any time somebody's going into their bank accounts, unfortunately, it offers an opportunity to make a mistake or to make an impulsive decision. So just to try to reduce this decision load by putting things on safe autopilot. The other thing I think is really important is, by the time you get up into your 60s or certainly in your 70s, is to have some sort of team. I like to call it your financial wellness team. Is to have other people who can help you make those financial decisions, especially the difficult financial decisions. And that's usually going to be family members. It's usually going to be kids. I was fortunate in my family. I have three other siblings, and my dad died fairly early, but we were helping my mom, pay her bills and manage her investments. And so we really took it over, get that power of attorney signed. It's an incredibly important document. I think it's a very underrated document. Have that power of attorney, maybe get a couple people on that power of attorney, have the healthcare proxy, living will. So I'm kind of mingling two different concepts here. So it's really, having the team and having the legal documents together. So have those legal documents really important. I think, power of attorney is arguably, in this stage, more important than a will. That would be that would be the first document, then probably, healthcare proxy, living will, and then will. I'm not saying will is not important, but those other documents, because those are all the power of attorney and the living will and the healthcare proxy. Again, they focus on decisions. They say, okay, here's who's going to help me make these important decisions. So yeah, and have that team together, and that team can include financial professionals, can include healthcare professionals. So it's really hard to do this stuff alone, and it's really hard to do this even if you're just one person taking care of mom. That can be hard enough. So try to identify people can help, identify their roles, identify the responsibilities. Again, usually family members, but they can be friends. Obviously, you want to be trusted individuals. But to me, that would be, that's really critical, is because you want these older adults over time to start delegating, right, financial decision-making authority. I mean, we almost took almost all of it away from my mother. And you know what? She loved that. She didn't worry about it. That's the
We
thing I
should all
tell
be so
people,
fortunate.
sure, some people, especially I think men, want to hang on
Right.
to making all those decisions. But I say, look, you're 80 years old or whatever. Why do you want to be worried about that stuff? You should be worried about, winning the bocce tournament tonight, or, worried about, what you're going to, pack on your week vacation to, Santa Barbara. I mean, that's the stuff you want to be worried about. So I think that those, there's the simplification, the legal documents, and the team, I think are three of the most critical components. Because what I learned, I've done some work with some really outstanding medical doctors, psychiatrists, and the thing they keep coming back to is safety and protection. My friend who's the head of geriatric psychiatry at Mass General Hospital would say, we want to keep mom safe. He was helping with my mother. Physically safe, cognitively safe, emotionally safe, financially safe, protection, safety. Those are terms that they use over and over, and that really stuck with me. So that the first thing when I think about, when people ask me, I have friends, what should I do with mom? Is mom safe? Is she
Right.
physically safe? Is she emotionally safe? That's really where it all starts, in my view.
Okay, let's see if we can go back to the question of decumulation. We touched on it earlier. I want to double back. Do you have any thoughts with regard to tax efficiency? Or what about the so-called 4% rule, which I suspect you're at least familiar with? And it's not really a rule, it's just a rule of thumb that Phil
Yeah.
Bengay came up with a while ago. What are your thoughts about the way people should go about taking the money out to pay themselves for as long as they may live?
I mean, again, I'm not an expert in that area. I know people who are. The 4% rule, I think there's a couple things. One thing that I've learned is that, often people don't spend enough in their retirement. So I think some people might say that the 4% rule, maybe should be more like a 5% rule, or because that's one thing that, I think is really important. We want people to enjoy their later years. And so sometimes people tend to hold back a little bit. So that's one thing I think, and financial advisors can help with that. But there's also these biases against, spending down savings, right? I have a friend, his dad is, I think, 99, has, says something like $2 million in the bank, and had to move to assisted living facility, and was was saying that he was really worried that because the new facility cost $200 a month than the previous one. And my friend's like, Dad, you could live at this facility for the next 35 years or something like that. So, but I think that's very common in that generation. So there is, so one thing that some of my colleagues at LIMRA, some of the research fellows there have done some pretty good work suggesting that people are more likely to spend money, like their social, any kind of ongoing income. So they're more likely to spend pension income or Social Security income or annuity income. They're more likely to spend that money than they are to spend a savings nest egg. So that's one argument for transferring some of the, your nest egg into some sort of annuity or some ongoing payment, because you're more likely to spend that money and you're more likely to feel better about that. So I think that's one thing, to keep in mind is, be careful about going too far in the other direction. Obviously, you don't want to run out of money, but keep in mind that you also want to enjoy your retirement. You've been working hard your whole life, and you have these plans and these goals, and don't be afraid to go ahead and achieve them. So in turn, and then use your this is what financial advisors are for, right? Things like tax optimization, but talk to your advisor about this, and tell them, okay, here's my goal. He or she's going to have all your asset information, and then give them a sense of what your spending budget is, and there may be a chance that the advisor says, hey, you're fine.
Yeah,
You don't need to worry about
exactly.
this.
That's exactly what I was thinking of when you talk about the 5% rule. Because if you only have a limited nest egg, 5% probably is a bit reckless. But if you have $2 million, like your friend, and you're in your late 90s, then come on, it could be 10%. It's just like you're not going to run out of money no matter what. So it's just one of those things where a lot of people don't contextualize their decision making, and I think that's important. I wanted to ask you about heuristics. You have in the past written about heuristics, and it's one of the things that for people who are listening, those are just mental shortcuts, rules of thumb that people apply because they usually work out reasonably well, but they're not necessarily slow, methodical, thought out, rational decisions. What would you say is the role of heuristics in decision making as people age?
Yeah, I think, heuristics are something I have been very interested in because, especially as people get older, people use heuristics in part because the world is just very complicated, right? So it's hard to model. So it's hard to optimize. There are too many uncertainties, and it would just take you too much, cognitive capacity to be able to work all that out, even, maybe if you're a financial professional. So basically what humans do, and behavioral science has shown over and over, that people take these kind of shortcuts and use these kind of rules of thumb. And most of the time that works out fine. So yeah, I do think there's, a rule for, like the 4% rule is basically a heuristic, something like that. Or make sure you save 20%, try to save 20% of your income as you're growing up. That's a heuristic. So you don't have to think about, well, what am I going to do this month? And blah, blah, blah. It's just like 20%, or just how much do I take out? Just take out 4%. And, those heuristics, again, they're shortcuts and they may not be perfect, but a lot of times they're good enough, and they certainly help to reduce the cognitive load on individuals. So I think heuristics can play a very important role in many facets of retirement planning, because again, it's so freaking complicated.
Right.
So, heuristic can be, I'm going to exercise 5 days a week. I'm just going to exercise. Everybody says the health benefit's good. I don't know if I should be doing this exercise or that exercise and blah, 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 but I'm going to go for, 2-mile walk every day, 5 days a week, that kind of thing. I'm only going to, I'm only going to drink alcohol on the weekends. That's kind of another heuristic. So things like that, I think, can be very, very helpful for adults because, again, optimizing in this environment is really difficult. So it's okay to take some, sort of thoughtful shortcuts and, try them out. If it doesn't work, try something else. But the nice thing about heuristics, sometimes, commitment can be a part of heuristics. So you can just say, look, I'm going to commit to X, Y, and Z. And again, that makes, okay, committed to X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to do D. I'm not going to do F. I'm not going to do Z. I'm just going to do, one of these 2 or 3 things, and that's it. I'm going to try that for a while. And a lot of times, again, that can be, that can work out. You can still give you good outcomes. And again, it reduces that cognitive load, can reduce stress. So I think that's just a natural part of who we are. And that's not a bad way to make decisions.
So let's wrap this up. The podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. If it was up to you, Chris, what advice would you give people listening today to help them make better wealth decisions?
I would say, I really think, again, this idea of simplification is really important. And the idea of putting a team together is really important. I would say try to do some combination of those 2 things. Take a look at your accounts. And if you got 17 different brokerage accounts, you probably don't need 17 different brokerage accounts. If you're not getting help now, start looking around for people who can help you. And again, I know you don't want to be a burden on someone, but just, at a minimum, start finding, if you're getting older, if you start finding somebody who could maybe just look over your shoulder every once in a while, start that process. So, because it's really, as you know, it's much easier to start the process early when things are good and be proactive. Because what often happens is people wait, and then somebody has a health event or somebody has a bad financial event, and then you're doing damage control. So preparation is really important. Advanced preparation is important. Again, it ties back to the protection. So start a little sooner. Try to simplify things and get your wellness team together. That's what I'd recommend.
That's why I thank you for your time today. It's been a real pleasure, and I think it's been quite insightful. So all the best to you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
If you're worried about the current investment climate and your money, go to my website to book a call for personalized advice to assist you in feeling secure and protected about your retirement.